As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
One of the worst performances of my career, and they never doubted it for a second.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble.
You just gotta keep living, man. Livin.
Son of a bitch. He stole my life.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Zac Efron has helped deliver one of the standouts of A24's incredible 2023 with the film that closed out the year for A24's lineup and delivered definitely one of the best modern sports films for sure. A film that is, of course, a wrestling film and appealing to that audience of wrestling fans, but also has so much artistic storytelling throughout it. And with some of the best performances of the year for sure, with an incredibly strong ensemble full of great characters. So we're going to get right into The Iron Claw, which was released in December of this year, directed by Sean Durkin, who is a lifelong wrestling fan and really had a lot of passion for this storytelling and said before he made it that if he could direct any film in the world, it would be this one, a story that he had been really fascinated with since childhood and clearly put so much heart into it, along with all the actors who cast it who put their whole heart into this project completely. So Ryan, why don't you start us off? What do you think about A24's new film, The Iron Claw?
Yeah, this is now back-to-back films we're doing where they're trying to capture that like 70s aesthetic, and I think Iron Claw does a good job of capturing all of that overall, like for everything, like the costumes, the music, just the general warm feeling from the movie. I think does a good job of just creating a good narrative. I really that kind of feeling of nostalgia for that time kind of carries you throughout the whole film. And I think Sean Durkin are done brilliantly capturing that kind of era of wrestling during that 70s, 80s period. Really like the old style broadcasts that really immerse you into like the different area of wrestling and kind of the insight of the kind of background stuff of wrestling. Like we've seen that for another sports film that I really like. Darren Aronofsky's The Wrestler, which kind of gets to the not so pretty side of the business. So we kind of seen that again in this film. But I used to be a big fan of wrestling like when I was younger. Not most of the side that or the period of time that this is set, because it's in the 70s and 80s. So I didn't know anything about the Von Erichs going in, and I actively avoided any information about them as I expected it to be quite a like heavy hitting film. Just from the small stuff that I'd heard. And I had no idea it was going to be like a tragedy like of like this kind of like extent that it would end up being. Like it's a film full of like a lot of gut-wrenching moments, and that if it wasn't based on like a true story, you'd be calling it like over the top and unrealistic because how horrible these events are. But like makes the film even greater once you find out that all these events are true. The ideal scenario for going into any film is of this structure, based on true events, is to kind of go in not knowing anything. But like I always prefer not knowing the real story, and that like you always get to like compare the things that happened in the movie with real life, and I think that always makes the film better after you've watched it. However, this is kind of where the film failed to me at times because I don't think it reached the emotional heights that I hoped, mainly due to pacing and stuff like that. But that was probably because of the trailer. This is the big advocate of movie for not watching trailers, because as soon as I watched that, I know I was annoyed because I knew that it instantly had spoiled a couple of the emotional moments that were coming in this movie. They're very obvious because of that, and so it's definitely a big reason for why you should not watch trailers going forward. But yeah, I still really enjoyed most of it. I love the cast, like you said, it's brilliantly acted. It just slightly slips up a few important moments for me that stops it being like a great film of the year. But I still give it a 3.5 out of 5, and it sits in my top 20 for the year still. So I still really enjoyed it.
So I'm kind of sat around the same area as you again. We had to wait months to see this because we got another delayed release over here. It's only just come out. This is a really important story to tell because I'm sure like myself and a lot of other people had never heard about this story going into it, which I kind of like seeing and exploring areas like that. It's a real tragedy that definitely shocked me. I liked it a good amount. I clearly didn't love it as much as a lot of people seem to be at the moment. Obviously, the strongest part is definitely the ensemble and the acting for me. It's just crazy how good the performances are in this film, and that's absolutely the strong point. Just overall, it just felt quite rushed. I'll get into further details later, but I just felt that Durkin tries to cover too much in too little a time, and I really think it could have benefited from being longer, honestly, and fleshing it out a bit more. But yeah, like I said, the ensembles were brilliant. I think the hair and the outfits were had me dying. Just crazy, crazy time period. And like Ryan, I also gave it a 3.5 out of 5 as well. So still good film for me overall, just not the highs that maybe I was expecting. But yeah, still solid film. So yeah, Alex, what did you think?
Yeah, this is a film I enjoyed a lot, and really for me, it's the thing I love the most about it is the themes of brotherhood. And there's a little bit of bias for me here because I just like films about brotherhood. I've written films with kind of similar themes, and having a brother myself, I really connected with that part of the film. So for me, that's the biggest strength of the film, absolutely. And a film that like on a first watch for me can like really make me feel emotional is definitely an impressive accomplishment of the film. And by the end, just that super powerful last line really did hit so hard for me that most of the film I was planning on giving it around the 4-star rating, and then just that last line really gave it kind of that punch for me to increase that rating to a 4.5. And I think so. It was a low 4.5 on a first watch. And then when I rewatched it, that opened up a whole new level of appreciation of this film for me because when you watch this film for a second time, it's a completely different experience. You can't look at anything in the first act the same way when you've gone through the emotions of the entire film once. It changes. It goes from kind of living in the moment of not knowing what the future will be that you feel in the first act. On a rewatch, that first act is just full of dread and irony and always has like kind of a bittersweet feeling. So I really encourage anyone who's seen this film to give it a second watch, especially in theaters if it's still playing near you, because it's such a different way of experiencing the film when you know exactly and have seen the emotions play out once, and really makes you appreciate a lot about the performances and the way that that ensemble just meshes together and really makes you feel like they are brothers. And overall, this is not a film that I would group into the category of like an Oscar film. And that's, I think, a very good thing because I think it says a lot about the year of 2023 that we got a film like this where, you know, not every great film needs to be an Oscar film. And I feel like we're lacking these original movies that, have original stories that are interesting and are artistically directed and well told stories that are not Oscar movies. Like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you see like these solidly just good original movies with passionate visions behind them that they're not Oscar movies. They're just good, solid movies. That's all they need to be. And I would really like to see more films like this come out in the future that are just, they don't need to be shooting for the Best Picture award, but are just good, solid, passionately told movies. And, I think it's also a great film for A24 because, as we know, they've lost some money this year. Not everything they've done has brought a huge return on their investment. So, seeing a film like this be more profitable than the rest is definitely a win for them. And, I think it has a lot of good mainstream appeal where it's a great movie for like a date movie because it's obviously more aimed at a male audience, but putting Zac Efron in there also makes it a more appealing film for a lot of female audiences as well. So I think when you combine Zac Efron with the subject matter and just the wrestling fan base, it's definitely a recipe for a pretty successful film financially in a world where non-IP movies don't normally make a ton of money. So yeah, I think it's overall just a huge win for cinema as a whole that this film exists, and I personally really enjoyed it a lot.
I think it is like an Oscar quality movie. Like still, like I feel like maybe if A24 distributed it better or promoted it better, it maybe could have went for some of those Oscars because I think it is of that quality still, especially with the cast. Like I think a lot of the casting choices and the whole family are perfect. Like obviously, like you said, we have Zac Efron kind of taking on a lead that's more of a serious role than most people than have been used to seeing him. Like you said, that it does have that appeal. Like the guy from High School Musical is now doing this like very serious like Oscar level role, which I think will have a lot of people curious just to see that alone. But along with that cast, you have like a lot of people like Harris Dickinson, like he was great in Triangle of Sadness last year. So he's a great up and coming actor. Jeremy Allen White, I love him from The Bear. I think he's one of my favorite actors coming up, popping up out of everything right now. So yeah, the whole cast is stacked. They've all got insanely jacked. They're all like been training heavily for this. That was like cool to see. It's a very like masculine heavy movie, like you're saying, but it's also like I think it's for everybody. Like everybody will enjoy this movie.
Lily James.
Even the dad as well. What's he? The Fincher.
Oh, what's his name?
Again?
Holt McCallany. The character's name is Fritz.
Yeah.
He's in. Ryan, have you seen Mindhunter?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. Yeah, he's in Mindhunter.
Yeah.
He's great in that.
He's great.
Yeah, the whole family is just so good. Like that brotherly love that you were talking about, you really get attached to like each of the brothers' relationships, which is something the family really relies on. As you see the journey like going on for like the world of like professional wrestling, but like I really like just following them, all of them eventually joining the business, and it's more focusing on like the internal competition as well between all of them. They get to see who impresses the father the most. Instantly from the first scene, we just see how like brutally honest this father is. It was in the trailer, but he goes, there's a such a quote when he goes like, "We all know Kerry's my favorite, then Kev, then David, then Mike." He's just this like really blunt like character that just he won't hold back on anything. Like there's just these rankings inside the house. It's just an insanely toxic relationship they have with their father, and like pretty much everything evolves around them pushing in the sport, or everything in their life basically is aimed towards like try to get respect from their father and try gain his approval. And I really like it's kind of a good explanation of the impact this sort of thing that can have on somebody. Like, and it's really evolves from a kind of insecurity and regret that he has from his past like wrestling career that he's kind of like then pushing on his boys to really, and eventually he becomes like the kind of evil of the movie. He's kind of the bad guy of the movie. Although for the most part, I don't think the relationship with the brothers is really destroyed by this kind of relationship. I think they all still have like a very good relationship together. So it's not a case where like they're constantly trying to just outdo each other. It's more just them against the father most of the time. But yeah, I really thought they were all just.
I thought like Alex was saying that their relationship is like one of the strong points of the film, and I think that works really, really well. I think it works well to an extent, but like we'll get into in a bit, the emotion just slightly wasn't there for me, but I don't think it's down to that aspect of the relationship not working as well. I think it's down to other things, which, like I said, I'll get into in a bit. But yeah, the relationship they have with their dad, I think is written really, really well, and I think it works really, really well, and it just left me shocked, honestly. And speaking to people I know, that there's parts of the true story that they still left out of this. Did they miss out a whole brother?
Yeah, completely cut from the movie.
From which is it just like hearing that now, that's even crazier. And I'm honestly, as much as I like stories being told, adding another brother in would have given it way more problems than it kind of has for me anyway, because I feel like there was a lot going on, which is the main issue of the film for me. But yeah, the characters just work so well. And I think I've forgotten the father's name again, but yeah, his performance was just absolutely incredible. The way he just like commands the screen every time he's on there, and it's really sad to see, honestly. Yeah, Alex, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, when I talked about, it not being an Oscar film, I was more kind of referring to the Best Picture side of the race, because I totally think there are performances in this film that deserve to get nominations. And, my personal picks for the awards, the ones I would choose, there were a couple that I put in. And really, for me, I think the strongest two performances are the parents, along with Zac Efron, who, of course, gives a great performance. I didn't have Zac Efron in my top 5 just because it was a very competitive year with the actors race. But, had he gotten a nomination, I would have been very happy for him and think that he would be deserving of that nomination for sure. But I do think Holt McCallany is, as the father, Fritz's strongest performance of the film. And I think that he really is who drives the narrative. Zac Efron's character Kevin is definitely more of a passive character, and Fritz is the one who makes all the decisions. And even though these characters are grown men, he very much is still kind of like, the patriarch and is the one who is making the decisions. And just from the very opening scene, like we open with him, not with Kevin. And, we just see like him, even after the bell, just like showing no mercy on his opponent in the ring and just, beating the crap out of this dude. And then, after that, we see him and he gets a new car and he talks to his wife about like, just as long as they're the strongest, like nothing can ever hurt them. But, and then we kind of understand this is where he explains what his motives are for his personality. But at the same time, he says one thing, but his actions kind of reveal another, that it's more like this is just the way that he is and kind of enjoys being to a degree. And I think that Sean Durkin, who did an incredible job directing all the performances, the way he directed his actors, he seems to have been very specific about the way the actors breathe, because I think so much of the story is kind of, and these repressed emotions are communicated by the way the actors breathe. And Holt McCallany does a great job with this, especially in the scene where they're all watching the news about the Olympics. And his chest is just breathing so heavy. Like, even though he's this show no weakness character, he's not at all an emotionless character. He's actually a very emotional character. And we just kind of, in that scene where he's watched the Olympics, we see so much emotion on his face and just through the way his chest breathes so heavy that, like I said, it's not, even though he has, his strong posture and all that, he's not a character who is emotionless. He's definitely very, has a lot of emotionally driven actions in the film at times. And I like how Holt McCallany, even though this character has a lot of, less likable traits, that he didn't, as an actor, choose to judge him. And both Sean Durkin and Holt McCallany talk about, not judging the characters and kind of letting the audience form their own opinions on them. Because, you see sometimes in interviews with actors where they say like, oh, the character's an asshole or like he's a piece of shit. And I don't know, I just don't think that's the right way to approach a character as an actor, because I think the characters themselves don't often, almost never see themselves that way. And I think the actor should not take a less judgmental approach towards portraying the character. And I think that's why Holt McCallany was able to make him feel like such a real fleshed out human rather than just kind of, the evil, like no redeeming quality kind of portrayal that you see with some of these characters. And even though he doesn't really necessarily have redeeming qualities, he feels like a human with, real motivations and real objectives. And, he feels like someone who definitely exists in the real world. So, yeah, I think he did an incredible job, embodying this character and, his constant favoritism. Like, right away, he's comparing the siblings to each other and has the ranking. And he's like, oh, like, he justifies it by saying, like, the ranking can change. And I think a strength of the film is how his favoritism never kind of breaks the brotherhood between them. And even though that could create a level of sibling rivalry and resentment, that they really do stay together, even though he, to a degree, really does pit them against each other. And like the first thing he says after Kevin wins earlier in the film, he says like that he wasn't good enough, but then goes to compliment the brother on, his showmanship. So yeah, there's and also things like, when the Kerry, the brother who was in the Olympics, gets home, like there's no hug. It just gives him a firm handshake. And always like this kind of like the way he calls his father sir and not dad or anything like that. And there's just a very distinct character with a distinct dynamic between the family, which is brilliantly portrayed by Holt McCallany.
Yeah, like when we join the brothers, it's like Zac Efron's character Kevin is kind of like the number two, as like his dad says at that point in the film. But he's still kind of like the main guy in terms of wrestling. He's the guy that he's hoping to go and get the World Heavyweight Championship. But Kevin is a guy that's really like, I think he's more about his family, but he doesn't really know that at this point in the film. Like his brothers and his dad are all really important to him, but even though he's in this relationship where the only way he can gain respect from his dad is through wrestling. But yeah, I really like this scene with he's on his first date with Lily James, where like, these two things are really just kind of emphasized of his character. Those are the really only important things in his life, his brothers and being the best in wrestling. Although from the start, it's quite clear that it's not going to be like smooth sailing for him. He's not very good at like talking and stuff like during the promotions, which is really just as important for moving up in the business. Like, it's not just all about your wrestling ability. You also need to get like, the crowd on your side. So it's quite clear from the start that he isn't gonna probably be the brother that makes it, and that's once again exposed like during the fight, when he has the first fight for to earn the title shot for the heavyweight championship, where David has to end up stepping in for him at the end to talk to the crowd. So from that point, it's quite obvious that the rankings are going to maybe change about as we go through the film, and there's quite a shift as he starts to meet Lily James and starts to date her. And there's that scene where they go to the party at the university, and Kevin starts to begin to kind of care more about his family rather than wrestling, and his career starts to go like downwards as he starts to get more family and start caring about them more. And I think this brilliantly showed, like visually, when he first has sex with Lily James in the car, there's this cross dissolve into like this broken down ring in an empty stadium, all the lights are out, and then the next scene we're showing that Ric Flair ends up winning that title shot that he should have been in, that match that he should have earned, and his father's just instantly just kind of almost gives up on him at that point. That you can like see the moment where he just drops down the rankings and he then decides that he's going to start focusing on someone else, and then that's when he recruits Kerry because he's no longer going for the Olympics, and he recruits another brother into the kind of like.
Yeah, I thought his old character arc is really, really good, especially kind of after loads of the big events, kind of moving towards the back half. We get to see him when he kind of takes over the company from his dad, and that kind of relationship just really, really changes. And we kind of slowly see it kind of deteriorate throughout, I guess, as he moves away from him. And it's kind of when he doesn't want him to sell it, and he's kind of just threatening and say, if you sell the company, you're never allowed in this you're never allowed back in this house again. And I think I like the way that Durkin like uses the house as like a staple for the whole family. And I think it's just a really kind of good location building, and it kind of ties a lot of the relationships in together, because obviously we all know we'll live in families and houses, and I just think it's a really good kind of theme used throughout. And obviously that kind of ties in to kind of the ending, because that's where that's where the ending happens, and one of the major events at the end. And I just think it works really, really well, especially with his character. And I like how Lily James's character is to use is kind of the opposite of the father as well, and he kind of you see kind of the struggle that those two go through when he's trying to handle other things, and she's kind of trying to pull him back almost from what his father's kind of done from him. And you kind of see the struggle, and he doesn't give in, but he finally kind of becomes a father by the end. And I think that worked really, really, really well for me, the way that Durkin portrayed that.
Yeah, Zac Efron absolutely upped his game with this one and delivered. I'm sure maybe he's given some other incredible performances I haven't seen. I haven't seen a ton that he's in, but I think, from High School Musical to this, he's really proven his talents as an actor, and, delivers this character with so much repressed emotion. And, Sean Durkin talked in an interview about his experience playing college soccer, and, some really good athletes who their whole life was sports and they never really got to socialize and ended up being kind of quieter guys because of that. And that kind of inspired the direction with Kevin. And then, of course, apparently, I think the real Kevin, they said, was like that. I'm not totally sure. But I know that the real Kevin said, when talking about them adapting this, difficult story, I'm sure, for him to discuss. But he said, the one thing he said was, no matter what, just make sure that the audience fully understands how much him and his brothers loved each other. And I think they really do such a great job with that. And, as I feel like a big part of it is, throughout the film, he's losing his faith in his father's leadership, from him dropping in the rankings to kind of feeling like he's responsible in a way for the deaths throughout the film. And it kind of just slowly builds up until he has that kind of lashes out at him after the final death. But yeah, I think they just do such a great job developing this character with the first, at the beginning, we see that he's like a good wrestler. He's the top of the favoritism pyramid. And then there's that one kind of camera POV shot where we see him shit talking, and then it's not that great. And there's kind of, they do like the run back with the camera. And then he also has, there's the love narrative, which I don't know if I think works as strongly. I think there's elements of it that do, but I think in the beginning, kind of the names are more there for exposition dumps, and that's where they were kind of losing me a little bit in when I first watched the film, just because I felt like these scenes were pretty exposition heavy and kind of just giving him someone to explain the family backstory to. But yeah, and then I think there's so much of Zac Efron's strongest acting is the moments where he's not speaking and we just see his face, and like when he's sitting on the steps and he then listens to the voiceover letter from David after he dies. And another one where when David's picked over Kevin, and there's the high angle shot of the three of them. It's a really great shot. And we see them, and the brother Carrie's like very like lean, slumped down, and Kevin and David are both sitting up straight. David completely still, and Zac Efron's just moving his thumb in the slightest way. Where when the frame's like that still with that little movement, you notice every motion, and it just very subtly separates the way that Kevin's feeling from the way that David's feeling at this moment. And he has his head down, so we can't see his face, but we know that he's got to be upset that as the older brother, he was kind of passed over here. And I think one of the most interesting, complex things about the character is how he's the oldest brother, but had an older brother. And in the beginning, there's only two brothers. It's just this kind of isolated, close relationship between him and his older brother, who we don't realize at the time that's the last we're ever going to see that character. So I think that really makes a lot of emotional complexity with the character and how he kind of stepped into that brother's shoes, but is dealing with the loss of that brother on a more personal level than the younger brothers, because I don't know what the age gap is, but he clearly was the closest one to the older brother who passed away. So yeah, I think he did a great job embodying this character, and also things like I talked about the way Sean Durkin directs the way his characters breathe. And if you notice that when Kerry goes out to his championship fight, then he leaves and we see Zac Efron standing there, and just the way he breathes, we can see that he's kind of letting out his upset feelings about being passed over once again. And then he takes a couple breaths pause before he delivers that super powerful final line about him once being a brother. So yeah, you really feel his performance, the love that he had for his brothers, and it's a big part of why all of the dynamics work so well. But Ryan, do you have any thoughts on any of the other characters?
Yeah, particularly Kerry, like he was kind of different to a lot of the brothers, at least at the start. He's just kind of someone that they talk about as like this other person. Like we're just kind of know him as the person that's at the top of his father rankings, and that's not until about 40 minutes in that when the Olympics get cancelled and Kerry has to come home, he's kind of, we kind of assume that he's going to fall down the pecking order now that he's not got that Olympics that he's going to, and that's when we're finally introduced him. And then now kind of has to just start over completely wrestling, kind of competing with his two other brothers. And I think it particularly hits Kerry the most with not being able to get attention from his father. At least he's the one that talks about it the most, especially when he returns. Like, he apologizes to his father for it not like working out when it's him that's been robbed of going to the Olympics, but he's still only thinking about how his father feels about this. So it kind of shows that he was only doing that again to just get approval from his father. And then the moment that he asks him to join wrestling, all of them like kept pretending to not really care in front of him, but after they all celebrate. So there's kind of this like divide between how they all act together and how they act in front of their father. It's just everything they do is just about his approval and what he's thinking of them. Again, and that's pretty much the only reason a lot of them even go into wrestling. So again, just shows how much he's put on their kids, kind of forcing them into this path. And again, just the strong brothers relationship, like they can all be their true selves around like each other. They can't really do it in front of their father.
Some of I think some of them stand out more than obviously others, obviously because of kind of screen time and things like that. But I think Kerry was, outside of Kevin, had definitely the biggest impact for me, and I think by far was the death that had the most emotional weight behind it. Um, because for me, with David and Mike, I think David's death was kind of spoiled in the trailer, like Ryan said, which for me the emotion didn't fully hit there, and then from there we're kind of jumping from injury to death to injury to death, and there's just in that kind of middle act, and there's just really no breathing room that yeah, I just find the emotion for those characters and around their deaths just quite ineffective, which is kind of down to the rush nature and the biggest problem for me in this film. Um, but the kind of going back to Kerry's character, that Durkin then kind of moves away from that into the last act. He builds on Kerry's character really, really well, which makes like the entirety of the last act hit. As like hit as the best amount as that I wish that David and Mike's death did. But yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why I get annoyed by this. This is a really picky thing, but when you get I don't know if this is in America, but when you get before a film, you get the certificate and what's in it. It literally says suicide in it. How big of a spoiler is that for a film? I don't know why that's a really, really picky thing. But in the age rating before it comes up, it literally says suicide. That really, really annoyed me, because you're kind of waiting for it almost. Only like this is going to happen, and it does happen, and it's you kind of see everything in this really kind of visceral way, and that really shocks me. But it's really annoying that happened, because you're just waiting for it, and it doesn't come as like a massive surprise. But yeah, I thought all the brothers just played off each other really, really well. Just unfortunate that I think Mike and David weren't written as best as they could have been in this film, for me anyway.
Yeah, for me, it's not that I think any of the individual brothers really stand out as much as I think they just cohesively work so well together, and I think the dynamics between the actors work really well, and I think they all seem to really feel like brothers throughout the film. But briefly, just because both you kind of touched on it, I do want to talk about emotional spoilers, which I think a lot of people don't realize today, and that is that if I haven't seen the film, I don't want to hear if the film made you sad or made you happy, if there was the second half changed tone from the first half. Like, that is a bigger spoiler for me than actually giving up the plot. Because the most important thing with a film is the emotion. I don't want to know what emotion I'm going to leave the theater with. I want to come up with my own based on what I've just experienced. And I have a friend who saw this like the day before I did. He saw it opening night, and he was just like, "Yeah, really sad movie." I'm like, "Oh, thank." Like I tell this dude, I'm like, "Do not tell me anything," and he just thinks like, "Oh, that's not a spoiler. I didn't tell you what happened." Like, no, dude. Like, now I go into the movie and I'm like, "All right, one of these dudes is gonna die." So like, obviously, if you're telling me it's such a sad movie, I see the movie's building this brotherhood. I could put two and two together that someone's gonna die. I didn't, however, know that all of them were gonna die. And I think that, it's the first half of, or really the first act of the film has like such a great, fun, nostalgic feeling with like, just we see the characters do fun things. We see the characters having fun, and the actors seem like they're having fun portraying them in these scenes. And I think that, it's also the filmmaking seems to be having so much fun. Like, the camera is so much more freer with like these really fun, more elaborate shots. And I think all of that works so well in setting up, the eventual payoffs. Like, you, just seeing them play football isn't enough. Like, how much fun they're having playing it is what makes that final scene with Zac Efron seeing his kids play it so effective, because we saw how much fun and how immersed in the moment they were when he was playing it with his brothers. And yeah, we just see them simply do brotherly things, and also Sean Durkin films them together, like a tight shot of three of them in the car, just eating and listening to music, and then like when they're in the lake and you have like the three tubes that they're all like grabbing onto each other and staying close together, And there's just so much of, filming them together and capturing them in the same shot that sets this up perfectly. And like sneaking out to go to the party. And it's like just the fact that the mother says no makes it that much more of like a fun bonding experience that they have to sneak out to go do it. And, I think in terms of the first watch versus second watch, like, on the first watch, these characters, as they're having fun with his brother Zac Efron, he doesn't realize that this is the peak and this is going to be the memories that he's reflecting on. In the moment, he doesn't realize that, and we as the audience also don't. But then when you watch it on a second time, you really like take it in, like, wow, this was the peak. And there's that kind of theme song of the film, which is the one like I want to live like this forever, and there's the shot where the brother's singing it. It's one long take at the party, and the opening shot of that party scene is just 3 red Solo cups, and it goes into another room of the party, and it's handed out. Just there's another girl in like the group, but the 3 cups just for the 3 brothers, and just that symbol of like the 3 cups all together, I think is so symbolic of this moment in the film. And then as the long continuous take goes on, it moves into the brother Mike who's singing the song, which is very thematic to the film. And I just think, like this is the peak of their kind of brotherly fun, and they have no idea that it is in the moment. Like they're kind of taking it for granted to a degree. Not that they're taking it for granted, but they just don't know how this is something they're going to look back on and wish they could have this feeling back. And also, like at the wedding, which is the last time they're all together, there's a big 4 shot of all them dancing, and then it slides down close-ups of all of them and lands on David. And then there's this slow dissolve, and it just doesn't feel right when the car's driving up in the next scene, where we later learn that David has died. And, I think that, I do think the gut punch here could be a little bit stronger. I think there's some good kind of visual poetry to it where there's like the empty seats, and then we move back and see Fritz before he gives him the news. But I do think, I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but I do think that they could have made the gut punch a little better. I think they really well executed the scene with Carrie where, he wins the belt, and this is supposed to be a moment of celebration. But the lighting's super dark. There's no music. The mood's like super pessimistic. And at the time, we think it's because, David's not there and they're upset about David. And we don't realize that it's actually foreshadowing for Carrie more than it is a reflection of how they feel about David. And, just like I talked in our last episode about, I really like when directors are able to make you anticipate things and kind of put the idea in your mind before something happens. And just, we see this long continuous road with like the David Lynch Lost Highway shot, and the speed and the sound are just accelerating. And we just know something bad's going to happen without any words, just based on how long he's holding on the shot. And just the speed is becoming more and more unsettling. It just creates this feeling that like, oh no, something's going to happen. And once it does, the way that the news unfolds, where it's like first it's now the focus shot, then he rises waist level, and it could be any of the brothers for all we know. Then the crutches, then the drugs, until it's like, oh well, he's alive. What happened? And then the camera like moves back as it pans, and then it kind of lands there, and then he enters with the missing foot, and then also that's when they cue the music as well. So I think it's just a brilliant unfolding of events with the way they handled his death. And then the brother Mike, I also think they did some really good filmmaking for, at least, where you have Carrie's trying to wrestle, and Zac Efron's kind of helping him up, and then it goes from like the mid ground to the deep background as the camera like comes up and moves in, and then we get our eye gets drawn to the film, and we cutting close, and there's just a hard cut to the letter the next day. So I thought that was really good visual storytelling to kind of create that moment. But yeah, I think, just a big reason why this entire film works is, like I said, not as much about the individual performances themselves, but just the kind of the dynamics they create between them and the way the ensemble mesh together. But also, there's one shot where they reuse the exact same shot twice with such great effect, where early in like one of the opening of the film, we see a family photo of all of them. And then later, towards the very end, after Carrie's died, we see that it's the exact same shot, no new angle on it or anything, just the same photo has such a different weight to it now. at the end. So yeah, the brotherhood is really what makes this film at the end of the day and what makes everything about it so effective.
Yeah, that kind of like midpoint, with the wedding and the party is a real high in the movie. It's some great scenes, especially like the wedding where they're all dancing and stuff. Like it's a really nice moment. It's just the kind of like classic high moment where every character, like you said, they're all doing well, everyone's happy, and like we know something bad is coming. That scene particularly, I think, would have benefited from maybe being a bit longer. Like it is good with like all the dancing, which is great. I think it's something like the Deer Hunter. It's like that's got one of my favorite wedding scenes of all time. Like it's also used as kind of a split off point in the movie. Like although in that it's like 40 minutes long. Like it doesn't need to be that long, but I think maybe it could have used some more effectively to like foreshadow or set up connections with the characters. And I think that's maybe what we needed. I think just in general, this movie should have been a bit longer, just to kind of like flesh out that middle point. Particularly maybe with David or Kerry, we don't know tons about them. Like we have some scenes where Kerry's like taking steroids to probably catch back up in the rankings, but we don't really get a lot of information about the brothers in general. But yeah, it is still great, like you said. Like it is just all about that brother relationship, but we don't have tons of information about them as individuals. But the wedding scene does have this like great scene in the toilet with Kevin and David where they make up and they confess each other about how they were feeling about David overtaking Kevin in the rankings, and they kind of make up. So it's a great brotherly moment in that. But like also we're saying, it's so predictable that David's going to die at that point, especially because the trailer, which really spoiled it. So I was just waiting for somebody to die, which I know that isn't really necessarily the fault of the movie. But I was just waiting for that to happen, and it instantly happens that next scene. And then even with Kerry, I thought it was a bit too obvious. Like the motorcycle, you see him buying it. It's just the most obvious thing ever that is gonna eventually crash, and it didn't go exactly like I expected because I thought that was gonna be how he died. But it's still a tragic situation with him losing his leg. But it just didn't have the impact it was going for. Sure, it's got some like shock factor because I think it's done very well with that scene where he's waking up, and he sees okay, and then you see his foot's gone. It just this whole section just kind of feels a bit rushed for me. Like there's less than 10 minutes in between you seeing David dying and then Kerry losing his foot, and then there's like another 10 minutes before you see Mike die or not die, get put in a coma. Like there's just all these points. I think they still did a good job of kind of like pointing out like the terrible relationship with their father. Like he's finally done, especially with Kerry, like he's finally achieved what they've like been working for. Before this point, like he's in the kitchen, he's on his own, drinking a beer. Like there's just he's been on this constant pursuit of like his approval, and even when he's at the top of the business, like he's still not getting that approval from his father, and that really is kind of the downfall of Kerry at that point. That he really seems like he seems to be the most impacted from when he doesn't get that praise, because like we see with like Kevin, like he kind of just takes on his stride and like moves on and focuses on his family when he doesn't get that attention, but Kerry's kind of like sabotages his whole life when he doesn't eventually get it, and of course this doesn't really stop his dad at this point anyway, because we instantly just see him in the next scene like move on to making Mike train, and then again I think I checked it was only 3 minutes later until he's next in the hospital in a coma. And I just would have preferred if they didn't try to kind of felt like this like speed run like through the middle portion of the film. Like, even if they'd just done like 30 minutes longer on the runtime, like it wouldn't have been an insane runtime, and it maybe would have had more time to kind of flesh out those emotional moments. Like they did have some shock value because it was just ridiculous, just adding on top of like these horrible moments in their life. But I don't think individually they had like the biggest impact possible emotionally. And then after that, in the middle, for the actual like wrestling parts, I also didn't really like. There's a fight with Ric Flair in that, and I did not like the guy that played Ric Flair. It felt pretty cheesy because he's the only wrestler in it that I actually know who he was. So I did not like his kind of portrayal of that like wrestler. So it was just kind of like the combination of like those rushed moments, and then it went straight into that. It just made me not really like the second half of the film, or at least the middle part of the film. But I thought the first half was great. It was just really this bit that kind of made the kind of middle portion of the film fall very flat for me.
Yeah, I'm exactly on the same boat as you. Just needed more time, honestly. But some kind of positives. I like the way towards the end how we see all the effects of what the father's been having on everybody. Particularly with Kevin Zac Efron's character, like after every death, he just looks emotionless, and at the funeral, he just doesn't seem like he wants to cry at all. And I think that is just an ode to his acting. I think it works so well. And then, I think I can't remember whose funeral it is, and then kind of Lily James' characters come up to him, and then we see towards the end this change that he has, and like him becoming a father. And then there are a couple kind of breakdown scenes towards the end as well, which just work brilliantly. Kind of him showing him moving away from his father after kind of those emotionless deaths for him, which we kind of see, and we see that with kind of Kerry as well, because he, after he's had this accident, he really wants to get back into the ring. He really wants to succeed, which is what ultimately leads to his kind of suicide, because his father just isn't helping him. And I kind of wish that was fleshed out a tiny bit more, kind of beforehand, but I feel like it was fleshed out more than kind of Mike and David's death. So I thought that worked really well. And maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but I thought there's a kind of a good bit of foreshadowing with kind of one of the best scenes in the film. There's a scene with Lily James and Zac Efron after they're kind of in their house again, and he's kind of deciding, oh, he actually wants to be a father, he wants to be there for his kids, and she says, oh, we're going to need a bigger boat. And then that's kind of leading into the scene on the boat with Kerry, kind of meaning the like a bigger boat because there's more people, there's someone else that's going to die, which I thought was actually a really clever nod, and I didn't realize that till afterwards, honestly. But yeah, for me there were highs and lows, but I agree with you, right? I think that middle act they really sped through that too quickly. Specifically that scene where Kerry loses his foot, I thought it was really well. Like Alex said, it very much reminded me of a Lynch film, but I just think that was just shoved in there really just quickly and just got on with it, like they just wanted to put it in there, honestly. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on some of the characters' death.
Yeah, Oscar talked about, Zac Efron at the funeral and just the way the kind of deaths build on him. And I think, when talking about that, there's a character who's really the unsung hero of the film, who in our Oscar episode, I actually picked for a Best Supporting Actress nomination. That is Maura Tierney as the mother, who's known as Dottie in the film. She's definitely not, I wouldn't say the most memorable performance in a way, where to a lot of people, she's going to go more under the radar because, she doesn't speak a ton and she doesn't necessarily have the moments that have a huge impact on the story. But I think she has a very strong screen presence. And I think her character, just the way she represses the grief, is such a kind of reserved performance that she just nails so perfectly. And just from the very beginning, like after we hear the favoritism rankings, Kevin goes to his mother to talk about how he's worried about how Fritz is treating Mike, and instantly she just doesn't want to talk about it. She's just like, nope, like rejects like any type of ability to have like a more vulnerable conversation with him than he could have with his father. And it's like, nope, like sort this out between yourselves, and totally doesn't want anything to do with that, and really has a very hard shell for a matriarch character, like very different from a lot of films where normally the mother will have more of like an emotional compass to the film and be someone who the characters can be more vulnerable with than some of the more Fritz-like father characters in other films. But the mother here is just as, not just as, but like she's still very closed off. And I think it really is summed up in the one scene. I think it was after, I think it was after David's death. And in that scene, because you have to remember that she's lost a child before every scene except for the very first black and white scene. So in that scene, we see the Fritz talking to the sons, and he's like, I don't want to see any tears from anyone. And then we see the mother just in the mirror, no words, and just the way her face moves, you can just see her repressing all of the grief and tragedy. And we know that she likely got the same exact talk that the sons got before this scene. And it's And yeah, I just think she does a great job just with her face of like letting the emotion bleed through, but also fighting it with all of her strength. And then by the time that that Mike dies, that one, like, she's upset that people will recognize the dress, and just subtly you can see that her hair's messier, her eye makeup's like not as more messy than it was in the earlier scenes. And here, it's starting to kind of the anger's starting to creep through a little more as now she's lost three sons. Just the way it kind of builds and builds out of her, and then ultimately what it leads to is her finding a way to express her grief with her kind of rediscovering painting. And there's a really good quote that she has earlier in the film where she says, he said that Mike says, "Why don't you paint anymore?" And she said, "I had my reasons. I just don't remember them anymore." And I think this is kind of relatable to all the characters, especially Fritz, where he says his motivation is to protect his family and put his family in a better situation, but clearly his actions do the opposite of that. And I think he's the same way. Like, he doesn't even really remember his motivations anymore. And uh, also the mother. One thing I think they brilliantly do with the visual storytelling of the mother character is whenever she's in the shot with the kids, one of them is out of focus. So when Zac Efron wants to talk to her, she's out of focus. When Mike's having that conversation with her, she's in focus, but he's not. And I think it really subtly shows this lack of communication between them and kind of this separation between the male and the female characters. Because at the funeral, when Zac Efron's not crying, we see that same shot used between him and his wife. And we see his wife in focus, but Zac Efron's not. And then when she looks at him, we focus all to him, but now she's out of focus. And, we see a lot of the brothers all together in the same shot, but the men and the women characters, typically there's one of them's in focus where one's out of focus, which, I think brilliantly, just with the visual storytelling, shows this kind of separation between the male and the female characters in a brilliant way that's kind of used throughout the whole film. So yeah, I think Maura Tierney, for a number of reasons, gives an incredible, underrated performance in this film, and definitely is an unsung hero. But I'll pass it off to Ryan. Do you have any thoughts on just the filmmaking or the wrestling scenes or any of that stuff?
Something with Kerry towards the end, actually, when he so we see him kind of become a bit more successful than his brothers. He ends up in WWF, so it's kind of like the highest they can go. And it basically can't get over that like insecurity about pleasing his father. Like, even though he's at like almost the peak of like his like business, he still try to please him. And then we see him bring a gun home for Christmas. Even though I think that's because he knew he was going to be getting his contract terminated with WWF. But yeah, it's a really sad moment where like he just wants to get that approval from him, and he won't even shoot the gun, and I think he just loses it. So it's one of the best emotional moments, and it really leads into his death so perfectly. Obviously, that being the gun that he used. I think that's one of the moments that actually hit me with like emotionally. I wish the other two were as good as that. Particularly, I see him in the boat, like Oscar was saying, like it's such a great moment in the film, alongside like the reunion with like his brothers at the lake. I think it's probably maybe the best moment in the film. Like, it's a scene that kind of rides the edge of being cheesy, but I think they get it just right, and it ends up being a very touching moment. And then they get another one perfectly right with Zac Efron at the end with his kids playing with football. It's such a heartbreaking moment when his sons like say like they'll be his brothers. Like, it's so sad. And then it's just I think it's just a phenomenal moment for Zac Efron in the moment as well, in the film as well. Like, there's no music, it's very quiet, and we're just kind of left there to observe him like grieving. And I mean, these are definitely the emotional moments that they got right, and it does leave the film on this kind of like promising outlook. I know the director got rid of the other brother because he thought it'd be too sad, but I don't think it really would have affected it, because I think the ending is so good and kind of shows that Kevin's gonna be okay. At least we're not okay, but he's moving on with his other family, so I don't think that would have affected the film too much. I think they definitely could have fitted those brothers in, but yeah, it's crazy the amount of like grieving that he went through. Like, did you know that with Kerry, nobody even knew that he had the thing with his leg? like until like 2 years ago when a documentary came out. Like nobody knew that he was like hiding that in wrestling.
Oh, shit, that's nuts.
Really?
Yeah, so it's like a new thing that even like wrestling fans like found out about it,
Wow.
which is crazy.
I think the ending was definitely the strongest point for me. That kind of last scene, as you were saying, with him with the kids. And usually, there's kind of we kind of get this time jump where we kind of see the kids a bit more grown up. And usually, I'm not like massive on really sudden time jumps, but I think it works perfectly fine here. Honestly, I know I said it was rushed, kind of in parts to middle, but I didn't mind it in this area. But yeah, that kind of ending just sums up everything about Zac Efron's performance perfectly, and that kind of crying that I was adding to kind of him letting out his emotions that his father wouldn't let him, almost, because he just wanted all the brothers to move on when one of them had died, and we see that multiple times, and I think it pays off brilliantly by the end. Just unfortunate that we didn't get that in the midpoint when it was happening. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts on the ending. Alex?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on the ending. I think the both of you did a great job kind of summing that up, and it's definitely one of the strongest parts for sure. Great final line, absolutely. But yeah, I kind of want to get into some of the wrestling scenes where, interestingly, normally when there's films that have intensive action choreography of any kind, or like sports photography they have to do, since it's so difficult and time consuming, a lot of times they just want to get that out of the way first. But Sean Durkin did the opposite here. Instead, he filmed it at the end and wanted to create the brotherhood between them first. And all the actors did their own stunts, which freed up a lot of the camera work and abilities. But what he does a lot of the time is use handheld. This film was a lot of handheld, and he uses handheld with long lenses, which kind of tighten the frame and have like smaller range of focus. So it's a lot more difficult to do. Normally, the handheld heavy films will be wide shots where just everything's in focus. You kind of just point and shoot the camera wherever. But using the long lenses, like, you have to really focus pull and keep it in focus. So it made it difficult in scenes like when they play football, but at the same time in the wrestling scenes, it creates like this obstruction where now we're really close to the fights, we're in the action, but because like it's kind of handheld and shaky, we can't fully see everything, which, I know some films do this and I don't always love it. It's definitely getting very popular, but it's something about the way this film did it. I just thought it worked. And, he cuts between like the wide shot of the wrestling with the handheld shots on story beats sometimes. Like when Kevin's taking a beating in the one fight, it's wide, and then Susan takes the lead, he cuts into the closer handheld shots. But I really like how the film captures the kind of how big wrestling was at the time and just the atmosphere of it, with things like the crowd. Like in the early scenes, the volume is so insanely high to where you can't hear anything else. Like at the beginning, the crowd is, you always hear like a crowd is ambient, but here the crowd is overpowered to the point where it's not like the thing of like tuning out the crowd that they'll do in some sports movies, where it's just so overpowering and captivating. And then when they use the score, especially in the earlier fights, it's the same thing. Like the music is super high volume, and it's almost like deafening to the wrestler or whoever's wrestling in the scene. And I really love. I talked about that one shot, which is just like the perfect atmosphere around the sport of like a Friday night small town in Texas, where they talk about Texas being the actors talk about Texas as a place being very much a character, and just kind of like this Friday night grab cases. The shot moves all through different characters. And I just love that shot, the blue hour lighting and everything. And yeah, I just love the way they create the atmosphere of wrestling in the 70s. And they kind of have also just the graphics they use, where they kind of use like they're modern graphics, but they're used in like they look like 70s graphics. Like they're a little more polished, but they're the way it uses like 70s graphics and pays homages to 70s TV and just the way of experiencing watching wrestling at that time. I thought they did a great job with. And yeah, I just think there's so many things they do here to really put you in the experience of a wrestler and a wrestling fan in the 1970s with, a great period piece that wasn't necessarily made with the biggest budget.
Yeah, the wrestling scenes were really cool how they were filmed, because I think they would just kind of have them do the whole fight like choreographed, and then I'm guessing he didn't use all of it because they didn't show that much of the matches, but it was kind of like I seen that they explained that like they almost kind of forgot that the cameras were even there because they'd be in the crowd, and obviously it was a real crowd, so like that would kind of hype them up. They'd kind of almost forget that they were even kind of acting in front of a camera. And I really loved, like you said, the music. There's that scene when Mike is kind of, oh, he's not in the wrestling at this point, but he's listening to music, and Kerry here's what he's listening to as he's working out, and that gives him the idea for their intro music, and then it cuts to this needle drop of them like walking out to their entrance, and it's the actual music that they used for their entrance for real life, and they all jump into the ring. That's such a great moment with the soundtrack in the movie. I think the music was used perfectly during the fights. I loved the handheld. It felt exactly like it would be like watching an actual wrestling match. Cutting between the crowd view and then handheld, yeah, just perfectly captured what it'd be like to watch wrestling in the 70s. So I loved all of that.
I'm not massive on wrestling. I know I've said in the past that I prefer to like sports films more with the sports I do not care about. For the most part, that is true. I think I'm a bit less on this. Wrestling doesn't really appeal to me. I don't know why. Maybe just the scripted nature, I guess. I know it appeals to a lot of people, but yeah, I guess it kind of took me out of it at times just because of the sport. That's nothing. No one's fault there. It's just the sport in general I don't really enjoy watching. But for what it was really well shot. And I just think they did a good job overall, like creating that atmosphere, especially with that kind of the opening with the black and white sequence. I thought worked really, really well. But yeah, just not a massive wrestling guy, honestly.
Yeah, I totally agree with Oscar. I've never been like a huge wrestling fan. Like, I had friends and cousins who were real into it, but just, growing up at the time I grew up and like knowing that it was fake, always kind of just, I was never able to get as into it as other people. But yeah, so like it's something I watched like a couple times, like over a cousin's house or over a friend's house every now and then, but it's not something I was personally invested in. But yeah, I think they do a great job of just creating the atmosphere and like the excitement and the crowd. I think is a huge part of that sport, and I think they really did use the crowd and capture that well. But yeah, I want to talk about some of Sean Durkin's filmmaking because I think he does an incredible job with it. And just from the very beginning, just like the head smash into the titles, and just like the tone and just how specific everything feels in those opening couple shots, we just trust the director. And I talked about how it's not a film that everyone's going to be walking into expecting it to be an Oscar movie, or like, and it doesn't have the feeling of like a more art house film, even though it's a very artistic direction. And just from the very beginning, there's this trust in the director because I had never seen a Sean Durkin film. I'd honestly never heard of him. And I'm going in with a level of trust because A24's name is on it. But even if A24 wasn't involved, just those first few shots feel so specific and like a real artistic vision that I think there's such a level of trust right away. And then I like, when they walk outside and the kids are just kind of like orbiting, just the way he uses motion with like them orbiting one side and then just kind of go over from the mother to the father. And just everything feels so precise and calculated. And there's so much that. But another thing this film does that I love is that, if you've watched other episodes, you know how I feel about dialogue. And I like films that minimize the dialogue, tell the story through the picture, the sounds, and the music. But my philosophy always on dialogue has been like, if you're going to do it, I much prefer it when it's done in long dialogue takes. And this film is a film that absolutely does that. When these characters talk, it's not shooting it from a couple different angles and patching it together. Like they are one actor bouncing off another, like listening to each other, reacting off each other within the same take. And I think when you take a dialogue approach, it works at its best when they really will shoot it in a longer take, like a lot of old Hollywood films would do. And there's so many of these, like when Fritz gives the speech after they win about how all three brothers are coming for like the best family in wrestling history. And, when Zac Efron argues with his wife after the funeral, there's that really good kind of long take where the blocking moves all around. I think it's Christmas, like when Carrie gives his father the gun. And, like the scene I talked about where he picks David over Kevin. And just so many of these scenes are done where the dialogue just plays out over a long amount of time. I think it just feels so much more immersive. The acting feels more natural. They're not, because they're really reacting to the way that line was said in the scene because they're in the same shot together rather than the more kind of patch job approach, which can feel a little less natural at times. And then, I talked about how Sean Durkin seems to do a really specific job of directing the way the actors breathe. And yeah, just a couple more filmmaking things that I liked is, of course, there's that really great shot. I'm sure a lot of people will notice where it's the focus never pulls and Zac Efron just going up and down the Z-axis in the ring. And, it's just the way they use the sound and all that I thought was a very effective scene to kind of reflect the way he's feeling through the wrestling. Sean Durkin talked about how everything in this film that he did was all about the perspective of Kevin's experience. So the wrestling matters when it's important to Zac Efron's character. When the wrestling's not important, that's when he chose not to show it. And, another one, just like the way it slowly pans around the medium close-ups of all the family watching the TV and the Olympic news, which we don't know why is important just yet, until it lands on Fritz with, just like I talked about, the specific way he breathes and shows his emotion through that performance there. And then there's a really great shot I love, just the layering of motion where he slides the Mike through rooms and then he lands on the left side of the frame, and then right frame, an area that we already walked past, moves out of the way, revealing Zac Efron and his wife, who then become the focus of the shot. Just a layering of motion I thought was just a great shot that I really liked. And another one is when Ric Flair comes into the locker room after the fight. You see it's like waist level on him, and you see just the edge of the belt. It's not that brightly lit. And then kind of in the mid-ground right frame, you see Zac Efron looking at it. And in the middle, you just see Fritz staring at it with like this angry stare. And in the dialogue, Ric Flair's mood is a lot lighter. He's like taking it more like a joke. But you can just see in Fritz's face just the presence of that belt that's just on the left frame edge, how like much he's taking it to heart, and having to look at him wear that belt, how much that's affecting the characters around him. So just the way they use the blocking and depth in that shot, I thought was great. And they use depth really well in a lot of these shots, and a lot of long lens use in the film, which I thought just really helped capture intimate moments and kind of move the film along the Z-axis really well. So yeah, so much brilliant filmmaking in this film from Sean Durkin. I would love to. He's done 2 other films. His first film seems to have gotten a lot of praise in the festival circuit when it came out, so it's definitely something I'm interested in checking out.
Yeah, I wasn't really familiar with him either. I'd never heard of him. I just knew that, well, I had confidence because it was A24 as well. The editing really stood out to me in this. I don't know if it was because I was reading about Alexander Payne talking about how movies don't really use cross dissolves anymore, but like you said, instantly from the start, when it goes from the ring into his dad, instantly stood out as some great editing. Filmmaking aspects, there was a lot. I really liked how he used kind of long takes, particularly that one when they're like driving in the car to their first fight, and it's very like Dazed and Confused vibes, especially with the 70s soundtrack. I really love that long take. So yeah, and I think he used a couple of them, like particularly with the wrestling fights, when they were like, particularly when I said earlier, when they jumped into the ring and then they would start fighting. I really loved all of those. But
yeah, that shot is that's like my favorite, one of my, just the mood of that scene, like not even just the cool shot part of it, but just the mood it creates with everything. I just love. I love atmospheric stuff and great music, great lighting, everything. It's just I love everything. But yeah, super Dazed and Confused vibes. And Dazed and Confused is a film with one of the best soundtracks ever. So now I think it's a good time to talk about the top 3 most important things in film: 1 music, 2 music, 3 music. And that shot, they play the song "Don't Fear the Reaper," which at first I didn't really think it had any connection with the lyrics to what's going on. I thought just the rhythm and the rock and roll energy of it just fits so perfectly with, a song that's popular in the time and immersing you in the time period, while also just creating the perfect energy and feeling. Like it's a very kind of not laid back, but a more like positive energy, like good times type of song with the kind of energy it creates. But it also, then I really started thinking about it, and this is the time in their life where everything's going good. They don't realize it's the peak, and don't fear the Reaper, because there's no fear of death in this moment. And There's no kind of thought of that the brothers are going to die and they're going to lose each other. So I think actually lyrically it also is very reflective of what's going on. They use Tom Sawyer from Rush also with the big montage, which I love that whole montage. It works great. Just the intense energy that song creates was great. And also like the score is, even though it has some great 70s needle drops, like there's some really great score use in this film. Like, when in the beginning when Zac Efron's benching and just the way it uses the guitar, like this warping like guitar sound, and just the drums, and then the cymbals enter in the story beat with the wrestling. So yeah, there's so much score use that's great. Like also the score sounds kind of like wavier with drums as well, as Ric Flair is he's kind of screaming and his volume in his speech is getting higher as like the score is rising as well. So just those two matched together, I thought really helped like raise the tension there. And I really think one of the best score moments is when that whole Olympic sequence with Carrie, where just there's like it's like this very electric but like modified and synthesized guitar and like rock score, and it definitely sounds kind of surreal. Like there's this surreal like ringing sound under the guitar and the drums, and there's very much like a pulse to it, that entire section of the score, which I thought it carries for a while and is used really well. But yeah, definitely an underrated score with some great 70s soundtrack music as well. But Ryan, did you have anything to add on the sound or music?
I think we've covered all the music points that I really liked. Just about the sound, I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but about the real crowd, how they were actually able to record that, the actual crowd's reaction to everything. And I think that the fact that they were just able to like kind of record that live, I think really helped all the actors kind of feel like they were actually wrestling and kind of get hyped up by all the crowd and each other. So yeah, I think that's all the sound. The party scene, actually, it was cool that they actually had like an actual band for that, and I think from what they were saying, like they actually had the party. So that really helped with all the atmosphere. And I know that he sung "It's Breaking Free" from High School Musical, so I hope there's a recording of it somewhere that they're going to release.
So that concludes our review and breakdown of The Iron Claw, one of the great A24 films of the year, and definitely a landmark sports film in recent cinema. Absolutely. Very excited to see what Sean Durkin does next. But yeah, overall film that I highly recommend. If you've seen it once, I recommend checking it out again, because I really do think the second watch, with the irony of knowing what happens, creates a whole nother way of experiencing the story. So if you can see it in theaters, get out. Films like these need our support. We got to keep supporting films like A24 and original movies to keep getting these films made. So highly recommend seeing it again if it's available to you. And yeah, like, subscribe, comment, let us know, which character was your favorite, what were your favorite moments. Oh, actually, before we wrap up, who's everyone's MVP of the film?
Definitely Zac Efron. Closely followed by the father.
Right.
I was gonna go Zac Efron, but I'll go Jeremy Allen White for a different answer, just because I really loved Kerry. I think he was my favorite brother. They were all great. Basically, just the brotherly love was the MVP. All of them together.
That's a dub, honestly. It really is the brotherly love. I'm gonna give it to, for an individual person, I'm gonna give it to Holt McCallany. But I think that Sean Durkin, and actually, let me look up this name real quick. But you're right. The brotherhood is absolutely the MVP. But hold on, there's one person I think we need to give a shout out to. James Price and, hold on, Jennifer Starzik. Jennifer Starzik was the costume designer, and what's his name? James Price was the production designer. And I think the production design and the wardrobe are totally unsung heroes of this film and immersing us in this 70s time period. They did an amazing job with that. But
definitely,
yeah. Sorry, wait, you was on that.
No, I was just saying I was definitely a highlight of the film, the production and costumes.
And actually the hair and makeup departments as well. They also knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, definitely the makeup. I think that really helped with all the brothers, like the 70s haircuts. all looking alike.
The haircuts were crazy, man.
These ultra distinct 70s hairstyles, where even if the production design looked a little more modern, just that hair, you're not in the modern age. But yeah, let us know, who did you guys think was the MVP? What you like about the film? What didn't you like? And who was your favorite character? We love chatting with you guys in the comments, so please let us know your thoughts. Like, subscribe, and back next week with another episode.